The kingdom of Oakhaven lived for the games. Every summer, hey friends, welcome. I'm Marcus. Another incredible gladiator story for you today. This isn't just a story about blood and sand, it's about the cost of a human soul. Let me know where you're watching from and please hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. The labyrinth of steel opened its gates, and the world watched as criminals and captives fought for a freedom that was almost never granted. Queen Elena sat on the ivory throne, her face a mask of elegant sorrow. She was the widow queen, a woman who had lost her husband to war and her infant son to a palace fire 2 decades ago. She attended the games not for the blood, but because it was her duty. She was the heart of the kingdom, but that heart had been frozen in ice for 20 years. Today's champion is a beast from the eastern wastes, the announcer cried. They call him the Nameless. A massive man stepped into the arena. He wore no helmet, his long, dark hair tied back with a leather cord. His body was a map of white scars, and he wielded a massive claymore as if it weighed nothing. He had fought 10 battles in 5 days. He was covered in the dust and gore of his enemies, but his eyes, piercing and blue, held a strange, quiet dignity. The queen leaned forward, her breath catching for a reason she couldn't explain. He fights with a style I haven't seen in years, she whispered to her advisor. It's royal. The match began. The Nameless was pitted against 4 armored veterans. It wasn't a fight, it was a dance of death. He moved with a terrifying grace, parrying blows and delivering strikes with surgical precision. But then, a spear caught him off guard. It sliced across his shoulder, tearing away the leather strap of his tunic. The Nameless stumbled, his back turning toward the queen's balcony as he reset his stance. The sun hit his skin perfectly. Queen Elena's glass of wine slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. On the base of the gladiator's neck, just below the hairline, was a dark, crimson birthmark. It was shaped like a jagged bolt of lightning, the exact same mark her husband had carried. The exact same mark her son had been born with. It can't be, she gasped, her face turning ghost white. The fire, the guard said he was ash. Below, the gladiator was being surrounded. The veteran sensed his momentary distraction. A mace swung toward his head. Watch out, the queen screamed, standing up and gripping the railing. The entire stadium went silent. The queen had never spoken during a match, let alone screamed for a slave. The Nameless heard her voice. He ducked the mace, spun, and in one fluid motion, disarmed 2 of his attackers. He looked up at the royal box, his blue eyes meeting the queen's tear-filled ones. For a second, time stopped. Guard, the queen turned to her commander, her voice trembling with authority. Stop the match. Bring that man to me. Now, Your Majesty, the commander whispered, his eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. He is a condemned killer. It is against the law to interrupt. I am the law. Elena roared. Bring him to my chambers, or I will have your head on that sand. As the guards descended into the arena to seize the gladiator, the queen noticed something else. Her high priest, the man who had been her advisor since the night of the fire, was not looking at the gladiator with wonder, he was looking at him with a cold, murderous fear. And his hand was reaching for a hidden dagger. The heavy iron doors of the queen's private audience chamber slammed shut, muffling the roar of the arena outside. The Nameless stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his blood dripping onto the polished marble floors. He was surrounded by 4 elite guards, their spears leveled at his throat. Queen Elena stepped down from her dais, her hands trembling as she reached for him. Stay back, Your Majesty. High Priest Malachir shouted, his voice sharp with panic. He is a savage. A trick of the light has blinded you. That mark is a coincidence, or worse, sorcery. It is no coincidence, Malachir, Elena whispered, her eyes never leaving the gladiator's face. She stood inches from the man who had been a killer an hour ago. Up close, she saw the shape of his jaw, the specific shade of blue in his eyes. Tell me your name. Your real name. The gladiator looked at the queen. His fierce expression softened into a look of profound confusion. I have no name, lady. I was raised in the fighting pits of the South. My first memory is smoke, and a woman screaming for me to run. Elena's breath hitched. She reached out and brushed the hair away from his neck, tracing the crimson lightning bolt birthmark with her thumb. The fire wasn't an accident, she realized, her voice turning cold. It was a tragedy, my queen, Malachar interrupted, stepping forward. One we must not relive. Guards, take this slave back to the cells. He is a distraction the kingdom cannot afford. Wait, the gladiator said, his voice deep and rasping. He looked at Malachar, his eyes narrowing. I know that ring on your finger. He pointed to a heavy gold signet ring on the priest's hand, a serpent coiled around a black pearl. When I was 6, the gladiator continued, the memories flooding back like a broken dam. A man with that ring visited the slave master. He didn't come to buy me. He came to pay the master to make sure I died in my first fight. He said, the prince must never return to Oakhaven. The room went ice cold. Elena turned to Malachar, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. You told me he died in his cradle. You told me you searched the ashes. I did what was necessary for the stability of the throne. Malachar roared, his facade finally cracking. He pulled a silver whistle from his robes and blew a silent note. Suddenly, the 4 guards, men Malachar had personally handpicked, turned their spears away from the gladiator and toward the queen. The king is dead, the prince is a ghost, and you, Elena, are a widow with no heir, Malachar sneered, drawing a jagged ritual dagger from his sleeve. I have ruled from the shadows for 20 years. I will not let a piece of scarred meat from the pits ruin my empire. Kill them both, Malachar commanded. Tell the people the gladiator went mad and murdered the queen. The guards lunged, but they had forgotten one thing. They were in a room with the greatest warrior the arena had ever seen. The nameless didn't have his claymore, but he had his chains. With a roar of fury, he swung his shackled wrists, catching the first guard's spear and snapping the wooden shaft like a dry twig. He used the broken end to disarm the second guard, moving with a speed that seemed supernatural. Protect the queen, the gladiator shouted, shoving Elena behind a heavy oak table. He was a whirlwind of steel and vengeance. Despite his wounds, he fought like a man possessed, fueled by 20 years of stolen life. He took a spear thrust to the shoulder to keep a guard away from Elena. Not even flinching as the iron pierced his skin. He disarmed the final guard and turned his gaze toward the high priest. Malachar backed away, his face twisted in terror. Stay back. I am a holy man. You cannot touch. The gladiator didn't use a weapon. He grabbed Malachar by the throat with one massive hand, lifting him off the ground. You took my mother's smile, the gladiator growled, his voice vibrating with the power of a king. You took my name. But you couldn't take my blood. He threw the priest across the room, where he crashed into a suit of decorative armor, falling unconscious in a heap of tangled metal. The room fell silent. The gladiator turned to the queen. He was covered in new blood. His breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked down at his hands, then at the floor, suddenly ashamed of his violence in her presence. I am sorry, lady, he whispered, turning to leave. I am not the son you remember. I am a monster. Elena didn't let him walk away. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his blood-stained chest, weeping into his shoulder. The monsters were the ones who sent you away, Elias, she sobbed, using the name she had whispered to a cradle 20 years ago. You are not a gladiator. You are my son. You are the king. The doors to the chamber burst open. This time, it was the royal palace guard, led by a commander loyal to the crown. They saw the treacherous priest, the broken spears, and the giant man being held by the queen. Elena looked up, her face tear-streaked but triumphant. She took her son's hand and raised it high. Behold your king, she shouted. The soldiers, seeing the unmistakable birthmark on the man's neck and the fire in his eyes, dropped to one knee. The nameless gladiator stood tall, the weight of the chains finally gone, replaced by the weight of a crown he was born to wear. The secret was out. The blood had returned. And Oakhaven would never be the same.